I have the pleasure of welcoming you, but also introducing the person to whom we are very grateful for convening the panel this evening, Professor Ara Merjian, who is a professor in our Italian Studies Department, an art historian. So for those of you who are thinking of minoring or majoring in Italian studies, you can study with a distinguished art historian as well as study the language. Ara is an associate professor of Italian studies at NYU, where he is also an affiliate at the Institute of Fine Arts and the Department of Art History, as well as the director of undergraduate studies. He's the author of Giorgio di Chirico and the Metaphysical City, Nietzsche, Paris, Modernism, published by Yale University Press in 2014, as well as the forthcoming volume, Against the Avant-Garde, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Art and Politics, 1960 to 1975. He writes criticism for Art Forum, Frieze, and Art in America, and we're delighted to have him and the panel that he's assembled this evening, whom he will introduce. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. It's great to be back here and to have together with us not only two of Italy's most distinguished curators, but also two friends. And so it's really wonderful to have them both in the same place talking to us about curating the contemporary. So I'll introduce both of them, and then we'll start out with a number of questions in a bunch of different areas, and then we'll eventually open it up the audience for questions. So Luca Massimo Barbero is the director of the Cini Foundation Institute of Art History in Venice since 2013. In 2002, he became the first Italian to work as associate curator at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice, and also served as a director of the Museo d'Arte Contemporanea in Rome from 2009 to 2011. And if anyone can speak to the pitfalls and terrors of curating contemporary art in Rome in the face of Roman bureaucracy, it's Luca. He's curated programs in several editions of the Venice Biennale and has served as the curator of a wide range of exhibitions in Italy and abroad, including Giuseppe Capogrossi, Una Retrospettiva, Lucio Fontana, Anthony Gormley, Drawing Space, Adolf Gottlieb, and numerous others. Chiara Bertola, to my right, is curator of contemporary art project Conservare il Futuro at the Fondazione Querini Stampalia in Venice since 1999. In 2015, she founded and curated the Premio Furla for young Italian artists and served as artistic director for the Hangar Bicocca in Milan 2009 to 2011, a kind of alternative space which does wonderful installations and exhibitions. A co-curator of the Venice Pavilion at the 2007 Venice Biennale and a curator of Rome's 15th Quadriennale, Chiara has curated exhibitions dedicated to Joseph Kosuth, Michelangelo Pistoletto, Ilya Kabakov, Kiki Smith, Mona Hatoum, and Christian Boltanski, just to name a few. Her book on the role of the curator, Curare l'arte, was published by Mondadori and Electa in 2008, and she most recently curated exhibitions of Giovanni Anselmo and Elisabetta Di Maggio at this year's Venice Biennale. So I'd like to give them a warm welcome and just start by asking a very basic question, which is, which public do you have in mind when you are curating, right? Of course, the fact of curating entails not simply the ideas and ideals of what it means to bring a show together, but also the practical act of bringing people to the museum. So what kind or kinds of public do you keep in mind when you curate?
But probably when I start to make an exhibition at the Querini Stampalia, actually I don't need to public because my central problem is to make a new exhibition and a new experience with an artist Because normally I invite artists to make a site-specific project in Querini, Stampalia, and this is quite strong. It takes me 2 years an exhibition.
Wow.
Exhibition. Because I think it's very important to make a real experience, so it's more affordable. Yes, the public is, is a problem because you have to consider that my foundation, the Querini Stampalia Foundation, is not a real contemporary museum. It's a library, the second library in Venice. It is an old museum. There is a collection of the Conte Querini Stampalia, the Querini family. And I started in 1999 a contemporary program, so I forced something inside a very old space. And the public, it's already diversified, different. The student in the library, the family or the normal public for the collection museum. And so was always a very big problem to put in relationship the different kind of public inside the Querini himself. So when I added the contemporary program, was a sort of nightmare because how is possible to bring the contemporary people inside? Probably the Venice is a particular city, no? You know, there is a Biennale, and so during the Biennale time, we have the contemporary public. But probably only for 3 days, no, Luca? After it's very difficult to, and there are too many museums, too many exhibitions, and the Querini Stampalia is a little bit behind the program of the city of Venice. So this is our problem. And we started with a didactic program just to bring people and to create a sort of yes. But I don't know if it's possible to think in a public, a special public, when you start to work with an artist. This is not absolutely not my thought. So
the public will be what it is. It will come or it won't. But the chief concern is the structure of the show.
Yeah, I know that I have a public that is confused because they arrive in Querini Stampalia, they want to see an old collection. Inside the old museum, they found the contemporary, sometimes the contemporary work. So, but this is interesting, I think. This is a plus.
I mean, it's something that also here in the villa, increasingly, thanks in part to our director, is converting oftentimes some of its spaces to, and even right now downstairs we find certain installations, which ideally can not only call attention to the works themselves, but also help to dynamize the collection that already exists. So ideally, there are instances, and I imagine this has happened at the Querini, that the contemporary objects are to some extent in dialogue with and not simply.
No, absolutely. But I think this is the most interesting thing for me to bring the contemporary art inside, because the museum normally, in my opinion, is, I think the Luca, in the same way, is something very dead work. So for me, I saw every time that I invite an artist inside is a broken something inside the museum. But the problem is to give an artist time to stay in relationship, a really relationship with the museum. And I saw something really, really interesting from Mona Hatoum exhibition, Kiki Smith, Jimmy Durham. They did a really good work inside, very size-specific. And not a decoration and not space. But this is the problem, in my opinion.
I think that Chiara, what Chiara did at the Querini was main for keeping contemporary art alive in Venice. when you live in a town that has such a big exhibition like the Biennale, then your town don't need to invest on contemporary art. And there's a kind of way of saying in town that art in Venice was, died with Antonio Canova. So it's pretty hard to work in a town that considers actually the beginning of the 19th century the death of art, which is dying every 100 years or every 50 years or whatever. No, I'm just like, I'm sorry, because I can't look at you because I'm like kind of mesmerized, but I try to look there, there's nothing hanged. But all these things. So I've been like this. So I think that what the Querini did and Chiara did was trying to keep alive the flame of contemporary art. And the Kossuth work that you commissioned to Kossuth, which is on the Querini facade, was kind of a miracle because we have a contemporary artist on a facade of a 15 and up to 18th century building. Well, we all know what the sovrintendenza means, and I was so surprised. So you fought a lot, which I think it's interesting because you can really think that contemporary art really works very well with the city which is alive. So that's a problem of making a city a museum. So you kill it. So when you say something about your collection is that the public wants to see something alive, I don't think it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter if it's 18th century or contemporary. They wanted to see something. So going back to the question is that when I'm curating shows at the Guggenheim, basically are historical or post-war. So we have a program ongoing since 30 years of interns. So we have internships coming from all over the world. So they meet the curator, and they want really to have the serious curator and etc. The Italian one. So and I start and usually when they ended up with this question, "What's your public?" I'm always kidding, and I'm saying I do show for myself because I don't care about the public, which is kind of a reason. I mean, being a curator or post-war, it's interesting because you start a show because you have a question. You don't just hang things. You ask yourself something about that artist. And at that point, you're telling the story. So you invite the paintings. You go and chase for them. You try hard to get that painting, not that one. I think it's very important when it's like writing. You don't, you need just that word. And that word, it's that painting in that museum, in that collection. So I think chasing, it's the hunting, it's a wonderful part. So you do it, first step is for yourself. We have a museum, 70% of foreigners visiting, up to 45% from the United States, then from all over the world. And I'm insisting on Italian art. So I think it's interesting when you think about your public, you think not to be too didactic, because I think that's very boring, and at a certain point you're just doing like this to your public, which is very annoying at a certain point. But you try to tell a story to bring them in order to guide them, and a person from Perth, Australia, can get into this incredible artist, which is an Italian artist, unknown sometimes. That's what happened with Capogrossi, or that's what's going to happen with the next Cini show, Osvaldo Licini. It's unknown Italian artist, but I'm going to have a show on him in 6 rooms. So I think, and then you dedicate all your show to the reader, so in order to make a kind of an experience. So you have to use all the alphabets. So I think it's interesting because also we go from 1.5 years up to 150 years as a visitor media average. So that's the point. As Chiara said, when you do something with a contemporary artist, and you're not, I love when you said we're not decorating, because we don't perfume roses. So otherwise just bring an object and put it somewhere and it's cute, which is a dangerous word. So I'm with you when you say that you have to work with the artist, so you don't think about the public. You think in order to be curating the installation of the work of the show. So, but when you work with an artist, I'm thinking, we were seeing, I don't know if we were seeing Tommaso Saraceno installation or something. When I work with Tommaso Saraceno, you know that the impact of that installation is going to be on the public. You start on a general idea that a certain kind of research of a certain artist would be more influent or be more precise on a certain kind of public. But the other point is that when we are so pretentious to pretend to know what the public taste is, then luckily public changes its taste. And I love that because you think, you go very basic and you go, oh, it's so contemporary, nobody will love it. And just the happy few will understand that. And then you see the young kids getting in and it's all in a sudden understand the word. So I think the levels, it's very interesting. And I think the public is the reason why I keep on going doing this job, because you don't know it. And it's interesting too. I'm always saying that I love to be the temptation, so to tempt them in order them to ask something about that, and not to tell something to them. Is I want you to ask me something, or you asking something about that artist. I think curiosity is. I'm trying to stimulate the curiosity of the public. For the rest, Venice is an incredible kind of field. I mean, a kind of a sporting field in a way, because we having up to from 24 to 32 million visitors a year. And it's very surprising because there's only 250,000 going to the Biennale, maybe 300,000. So I think that we still have a lot of, to work on it. I mean, the Guggenheim, it's the second museum visited in town after Palazzo Ducale, which is I call the Palazzo Ducale Grand Central, because it's the place everybody has to go there. And, but even if it's Grand Central, they only have 2 million, sometimes 2.5 million visitors. So I wonder, the Guggenheim has 450,000. So
More than the Accademia?
more than Academia, almost double. Wow. And it's surprising. So that's another point. When we work on contemporary art or post-war art, we do have these we are sure that we have a certain amount of people. So that's the problem, is not to get too used to that numbers, and you have to keep on create something. So I think you must be our next public.
Well, it's interesting because Florence poses some of the similar problems to Venice, to the extent that that the city itself has become a museum all'aperto, right? And also has kind of limited just physical space for interventions by and about the contemporary. So the weight of the past covers almost every corner, right? The Guggenheim in Venice is in some ways, a complete exception. Here in Florence, there's the new museum of the 20th century. There is the Strozzina, which is essentially a couple of rooms in the basement of the Palazzo Strozzi. So there are certain spaces.
Strozzi did something interesting.
Yes, they sometimes have
been pushing a little bit.
Yes, they had Bill Viola recently.
And Ai Weiwei and
yeah.
so for Florence, I think.
Right.
Vasari was handling.
Yeah. And of course, it's interesting that even the word contemporary begs the question of course, of what we mean by contemporary. In Italy, when we say contemporary art, we mean a much longer period than we do in the United States. Contemporary art in the United States has traditionally been sort of post-war art, and more recently, sort of art since the 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera, to, as we always say, the last 10 minutes. But there an exhibition opening in just a few days at the Guggenheim in New York. It's called Art and China after 1989, and it features a wide range of artists, many of whom responded to government repression in the wake of the Tiananmen Square uprising, etc. But some of the artists, including one named Huang Yongping, actually is publicly stated that he resented the inclusion of his work under the rubric of China as a Chinese artist. Um, and he said that in fact that artists have a duty to deconstruct the concept of nationhood rather than simply be bound to it. How might that bear on the question of um, the increasingly globalized world of, of the art world, of the art market, and necessarily of museum shows, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, I know it's a huge question to say, how is globalism impacting how we approach curating,
But yeah, this is a very important question because I thought several times, and I remember Karakov gave me a sort of answer because he said it's very important to speak a universal language, but in a local way. The big local is a terrible word, but everybody knows this word, and this is a sort of answer. Try to don't forget the relationship with the territory, with the city, the culture, the place in which this really is absolutely central. But it's true that it's very important to bring the local or the cultural issue to convert in universal language. This is important. And the globalization is in a way taboo because it's a sort of
flattening of local experience?
And so the problem is exactly the opposite. It's try to undermine your local territory or local culture. How is possible to, in relationship with these two bond? But if you are working with an artist in relationship with this space, because the space became a subject between the curator and the artist. So if this is the condition, I think they can make it work very special, unique. Yeah, because the problem, I don't know if you think that the museum that today is terrible. They are all the same. All the same.
It's like collection.
Yeah. And so the good work of an artist, contemporary artist, can make the difference. I don't know, because I work in very strange space, so it's not a contemporary museum, it's not a white cube. Even in the third floor, there is a white cube because there is an empty space, and I try to put in relationship with the museum space. One full of science, full of history, and another one empty. And I think this gymnastica, this mental gym is very important.
I think that we have to go back to the 90s, which is a kind of a period we jumped, we finished the 80s, we jumped to the 2000s. The 90s are not, actually, they don't have an idea, didn't have an iconic identity. I think everything was born there at a certain point because the market spent it up and the global market. So I think also about Chinese culture, I mean, new visual art in China it's very complicated because it wasn't all against, but it was something that was floating around in a different direction than the official lines. And as you remember very well, the first shows on Chinese new painters slash sculptors artists were either in New York, in the United States, more than the West Coast. It was the East Coast, and Europe, mainly Italians, and Venice, and promoting this new idea of Chinese. There's something that I don't like about this idea of global is that they stress on the idea of all being floating together. There'd be no boundaries, all those incredible slogans. But then everything is becoming so exotic on the same hand. So being Italian is exotic too. So they wanted to see something very Italian in all the Italian artists. And there's some of the artists that are Italian that don't really are Italian as a exotic. I mean, they're not sunny. They don't eat well. So I think this is the point. As Chiara said, I was walking. All the museums show the same artists. So the question is it global what sells more? Or is it global that something is more shared on Instagram? What's global? Is it how the people, is it global famous? So I think also that's a good question for a curator. Because when you sit in front of a director or somebody that has to fund your show or whatever, and everybody goes like, oh, but he's not famous. Sometimes they want it famous, but also relevant in the market. So I think if global is that, of course, you will have all the museum with the same artists. And it's amazing because I was in Athens and, you could see the traveling exhibition on the same artists or on the same group of artists, which belong to art history of curating two shows. But I mean, now, I think what's interesting is to see something that is Chinese, but is not exotic. Somebody that is focused on something interesting, which is not stressing or forcing the work to be so Chinese, to be important because it's Chinese. I mean, and I understand, it was like kind of surprised. The quality of the work, Ai Weiwei. But I mean, sometimes it's really stressing on the idea of what's typically Chinese and potteries or ceramic. I mean, but I don't get the flow of the depth of Chinese culture, which is like thousands of years of poetry, painting, everything. And it's one of the biggest culture in the world. So I think it's a big deal about identity. So the problem is that now we have global against the single person, which is always getting more and more and more single. So I think contemporary art, and when you curate a show, what you're saying and the artist is saying in the show has to move something and make you get closer again to a different culture, but which is not just a national culture. It's a visual culture at the beginning. So I think it's very important the impact that the work has on the visitor, that again drives the visitor into asking something about the culture, which I don't think has to be a visual culture, but has to be an interesting point of view about a culture. So I think that again, it's not iconic. I mean, I don't think that we are just iconic. We should move something and work on that direction. And global. Well, if I don't know if you went to Venice or if you saw the Damien Hirst show.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting.
So I think
It's a phenomenon.
I think global. I adore that show. I thought, when I went out, I told it to Martin, the director, and said I went out and I was going like, wow. And at the same time, I was dying because it's the biggest global operation, economical operation, production on contemporary art I ever seen. And it's a financial thing. On the other hand, it's using all the iconic idea of art history. You want a Nefertari? I have it. You want a Roman sarcophagus? Whatever, I have it. You want 18th centuries, Louis XIV, XII, X, I have it. You want a Rihanna? I have it. You want a whatever you want, every kind of icon. You want to make him house. I mean, all kind of icons that a buyer can ask. He got it. So I think that's global. So finally, when you say something about being global, is that they're selling a worldwide paired imagination. So the people is not going to the show to see things, is going to the show to recognize them, and that's dangerous. And that's a little subtle difference. But the people want to recognize things. Once they step, that's what our historians are doing. We step into a room and we go like, oh, all right, maybe Brussels, 1759, or then you go, and then you go like, all right, maybe, and that's, we want to recognize. So I think global, what makes to our mind and to our eyes, is just giving you what you have to recognize. Then, if you see something you don't recognize, it's useless. So I think future is little thing, less global, that drag the people to them.
Briefly switching gears with a different kind of question, and then I think we can start opening it up to the audience. There is increasingly the phenomenon of professional curatorial studies programs, training young curators in the art or science of curating. What is your take on these programs? Do you think they're effective? Do you think that they're necessary? Do you think that they're misguided? And if those
You have one, great.
and if they are misguided or if their intention is misplaced, what could substitute for them?
Yeah.
The problem is that when I start to be a curator, actually together, outside the university.
Well, I don't think Ara knows the fact that we're not just friends, but we studied together, and and we come from the same little region back there,
Exactly.
west in Italy.
And do you remember that our big experience was incontri con gli artisti, meeting with the artists that our professor, Mazzarioli, organized inside our department in the history of art in the university. That was our school of curating. And for me, it was the first time they met an artist and started to. So I don't think that curating
It's a science.
a school
Can be taught.
To be
To be a successful curator, yeah.
because in my experience, and I wrote, yes, I said before, I wrote a book, but not how to be a curator, because I think it's very difficult, it's very complicated job, and be a curator. It's a complex, and it's necessary to experience, a lot of experience, even a good knowledge. We need to be artists, but we need to know something about businessman, to organize a business plan, so to find money to make an exhibition. organization. So it's a very, very complex figure. And how to practice this different. And so maybe working to make an experience. So maybe the curator school, there are many, tons, but I don't know if it's enough. Because I think, this is my personal opinion, that to be a curator is necessary to have a vocation and passion. It's not only.
There isn't a set of prescriptive.
It's not possible to read in a book
Yeah.
some points.
Yeah.
And
A how-to guide. Yeah.
No, I don't know. I think today the problem is exactly that. People start going in a school of curator, and then is absolutely convinced to be a curator.
Yeah. Well, it's
It's a
interesting.
disaster.
It's interesting how the different programs kind of institutionalize different roles or force us to see them in a new way. In a couple of different programs in the United States, you can now, for the first time, get a PhD in art, not art history, not in curating. You can get a PhD in art practice, which is sort of mind-blowing in a sense when you think about it, right? I mean, it really is the ultimate kind of institutionalization of aesthetics, which we imagine to be kind of in some ways not necessarily pedagogical. I mean, an MFA is about practice, right? Not necessarily theory, and so it's interesting how these different programs can kind of pigeonhole different practices into certain roles in ways that are potentially helpful in some instances and not in others. But why don't we open it up to the audience? Questions for Luca and for
I just have something to say on this thing about the school, is that we have to make a difference between Italy. When you study, I want to be a curator, but if you do it in the United States, then you have like 150 museums. You can just apply. You can get into programs. You can be, you can stay there and work and know more about, staging and be an intern. I mean, you can have, a lot of opportunities to get into museums, which then eventually drives you to have experience, or at least, as our professors were saying, you have to study and learn, but when you are working, you steal. So you have to steal informations and experience from the others. So I think that I'm not against those kind of schools, but they're not enough. And you cannot even, I think, be a good swimmer if you don't have passion. And the public would realize that. I know it's romantic, but it's still like that. You can become famous, but you will never be a good one. That's another point. I ended up my contract with university when all my scholars and all my students were asking me, how can I become like you? And I was wondering, and I was asking them, being ironical, blonde and blue eyes, because they wanted to be on the covers, they wanted to be on TV, they wanted to be famous. And I don't think that when we were starting, we were doing lettere con indirizzo artistico. It wasn't even art history. So it was lettere con indirizzo artistico, storia critica dell'arte e cinema. So it was longer than whatever. So it was something that you had to start with Latin and then all, go and linguistica. So I think we never thought,
philological.
Was philologic, was everything. So I did Islamic art. You could do, restoration courses, chemicals. You can choose, and you can really. So I think that our world is getting so specializing that after a while, then becomes bureaucracy of the knowledge. So you can't really, work if you're not open to other experiences. You want to know more. So I think when something is specializing too much, it becomes a disaster. So just a little story. I was in Rome and I was co-curating a show on new American artists, the new generation. That was just my beginning at the museum, so I wanted to impress the Romans and to work on a huge show thanks to a private foundation who was funding the show. So, and this new, kind of young American curator arrived, everything was printed, everything was perfect. Of course, it was saying, I wanted something like this, and the artist should go straight to the taxi, to the show with a taxi. They wanted to, we had all kind of, stars lists on the quest of the artist, and we ended up in this industrial space. And I remember it was an Aaron Young work, idea of work, and it was a Los Angeles police car. Crashed car that was supposed to be hanged upwards on the ceiling of the gallery. And everything was perfect. On the paper, all the measurement, everything, we already had mock-ups and everything was perfect. The problem was that our ceiling wasn't, in our ceiling it was impossible to hang anything that weighed more than 25 kilos. And so I think that's the problem. So we're very specialized, but we don't, as Chiara said, we need to know the first rules. A painting which is bigger than that door doesn't get into the room. That's, I think, the basic idea of being a curator. And this floor, would keep, you need, a platform if something is more weighted than 300 kilos. Or 250 because maybe we are. So I think that's the point. Experience is interesting. So we should. Bauhaus doesn't exist anymore. It's even a music group. It doesn't exist anymore. But I think we need another Bauhaus. So what another thing, interesting thing that.
But would the Bauhaus have a curatorial department?
Yeah. Well, what our professor was telling us, it sounds like in the 30s, was like, oh, you're too intelligent and too smart, because I actually moved from the United States in England to Venice, and I was like 18 or something, and it was like pretending young. And he said, like, forget it, too intelligent. Just go to the academia, where all the young painters are studying, and make friends. So I think that was the first step, as we did, meeting artists. Yeah. And growing up with the generation of artists, which I think is very interesting. And otherwise, it's just, you go to a big gallery, you go to the best gallery, you grab an artist from the gallery, and the gallery guarantees you the success. So I think that's the point of the nowadays curator.
What do you think is your major responsibility as a curator in this contemporary culture? Because you mentioned that when you're curating a show, sometimes you can see the public will change their taste. So, it's a very influential job. So, what do you think is a major responsibility in this contemporary global culture?
Question, very deep question. I think is, for example, in my experience, I did a program, not just one exhibition. It's a direction. It's a taste, of course. Is my vision, and I invite some artists, and Luca said before, maybe it's important to invite very important artists because the market push this direction. I don't want to do that, for example, but I needed to invite some important artists because the Querini Stampalia was totally unknown inside the contemporary art world. So, exactly. So, but I try to put in a balance between. But Always, of course, in my opinion, I choose some artists that try to give an interpretation of our moment, our present. Even for me, was very important. Always try to give to an artist, to give back to them some possibility to move themselves in the language. For example, when I invite an artist to pass through the Querini Stampalia, to the past, this history of art, may maybe it's important for them to try to get an inspiration to change a little bit this side. I don't know, but every time something happens in a very very interesting way. And well, it's difficult to speak in my terrible English without without experience with the artwork. But the responsibility, I think, is one of the most important things that the curator must do to take in the central of his work, because it's an ethic exercise. And it's very important when you decide to choose an artist. This is an ethical decision. If you go, as Luca said before, outside of the market, of the globalization, of the long list of the artists the market decide to put in different museums. So, yes, I don't know.
What Chiara did was something. She's responsible of bringing good artists to Venice, which is different than just choosing important artists. And I think she did a great project on. She's responsible of a great project of growing generation in getting acquainted with contemporary art without going to the Biennale or waiting for the Biennale. I think that when I was appointed director at the Art Institute, the Cini was a scandal. So on our newspaper was when I was because there was an article in the art newspaper saying that a contemporaryist, which then you explained me what that means, could not become director of the Art Institute of the Cini Foundation because it was just old masters art. And of course, at that point, I wouldn't be able, knowing the 20th century and part of the 21st, to direct
the Cini Foundation. So I think we are responsible to keep art alive. It doesn't mean of what age. I think that we were talking about China, but I think that we should be responsible and ask ourselves why we don't know China's art that well, even of the past. Why our culture are all very, kind of specializing. So when you curate a show, you don't want to change people's taste. I mean, I don't. That's more. What do I call it? Curatorial wing-tone. The curator that wants to say, well, global is that when we make a show or we curate a show, or when we have a lot of work on art and culture and knowledge, we can do a little advertising like this big on 4 newspapers and maybe 2 art magazines. When a purse, a bag from Vuitton comes out on the market, you have a week after all the world with that image, with all the new. So I think that we have our responsibilities to resist to this idea of how evident images are superficial. So the director, when she was talking to me, we were talking about buying these things, and she said that you could also find some of the vases broken in the back, but were kept as wonderful things. So now she did something incredible to me because now I want to turn them all. So I think the responsibility is that, again, making people curious about something and keep it alive. I think. And then it doesn't matter how you do it, how philological it is, how superficial it can be, but I think then you have to keep everything like this. So I think that it's very sad when you think about scholars of ancient art, because I think they lost a little bit the connection with the public, and I'm not very popular when I'm saying this, in order to understand if the letter of King Felipe V was sent May 1st or the afternoon of May 1st, because we fought, which is interesting because that's what I do with Lucio Fontana. So I'm doing philologically. No, but I mean, besides that, you have to do that because that's our job. You have to know exactly when Felipe was sending a letter to the Fianna, but you can't pretend the public follow that thing. Then eventually they'll ask you. So that's a responsibility.
So thank you for the talk. I mean, I think it's interesting to address the responsibility of the curator as that of keeping art alive. And I wonder if that's different in relation to more historic art as opposed to art that's happening today. In terms of how art is viewed as alive or not. But I'm wondering in relation to that idea, how you define or how you talk about or think about your relation to the artists in that realm, as you work together. And I'm thinking specifically of artists that are living, which of course the relationship is one has other opportunities.
Totale. Very strong relationship with the artist. And for example, it's very important the artist trust me. And because I'm a sort of curator, I'm not pushing, but I try to make a sort of trip with an artist inside this space. Because I have only this space, and I think that this space is really, really interesting, but we need to open this space. I need, like curator, to offer this space to an artist, make a new work. For example, I need now to show just one work. This is the Mona Hatoum exhibition, and with Mona, I had a very, very strong, a nice, a good relationship during a lot of years. I curated several exhibitions, solo exhibition by Mona, around, not only in Venice. And that was the work that she did. This is the monument, come dice monument? Solo di monument.
Monument to the Fallen?
Yeah, in Beirut. Mona is from Lebanon, from Beirut, and this is the monument. And I remember when she went to the museum, and Mona did the exhibition inside the museum, the house of the family of Querini, and the third floor is a white cube. And I bring Mona, I said, please, Mona, do something, maybe go around, walk around in the museum. If there is something that gives you an inspiration, maybe you can do something new. And after 2 days, she came to me and said, Chiara, I like that sculpture inside the aristocratic table, no? The name is Trionfo. It's a porcelain. It was a decoration of the aristocratic table. And she said, I would like to bring this size and make the monument of the no? So in this way, you can understand how strong is the result, because she bring from the past an idea, no? Talking about the monument, the useless, a movement. And like a soprammobile, like an object, a decoration of the political field. So it was so strong, this work came from our past, our history in Venice in a little condition. And we exposed this work outside in another contest, in another museum or exhibition. So that because before I said when the local can give an idea universal, it transforming in something very local in a universal language. It's critical about the monument, about the world, about our time. No? So this is just an example in which way I like to work with an artist. So in a very strong relationship and try to give my experience, my culture, my knowledge to them, to convert in something different.
I think Chiara got the point on saying that the artist should trust you. So I think this the most difficult thing. Already having 2 curators at the same table, 3 curators at the same table, it's a big task. But the most difficult thing about working with an artist is both curator and the artist trying to be less egoist, less self-centered. And I think that's the nice moment where an artist trusts you and you can feel that you are also ready to, to live all your mental, whatever, hyperstructures, because you're very intelligent. You know everything, which is, I think, our best enemy. So I think that moment gives you the energy to work together. And I think that's the rare moment, because otherwise otherwise you become a producer, which is another figure, which is not interesting. Everything they can curate show just because they have money. Then that's another point. Sometimes you find, it's very rare, Chiara is with me, but sometimes you find generous artists. So artists that really want to do the project with you. It's not just they send you emails saying, okay, what we need is 200,000 for this, and then 50,000 for that. Then my assistant would come on Friday 15 for 2 hours. I mean, then artists saying, okay, I understand you don't have that money or whatever, but we build something together. At that point, you can really go straight to the city mayor and say, I'm doing the project, because you know that you both are working together, and that's, I think, very rare, but it happens. Then there's a little story about, again, history and present, which is a theme, especially in Italy, but it's becoming a theme in the United States too, because as you can see, recently, in the past 8 years, the quotes and the relations of contemporary artists in the United States towards the past 30 years. They're quoting Jasper Johns. They're working on Gordon Matta Clark as a hero. Warhol is Michelangelo. So, I mean, everything is really getting history is getting faster and faster back on contemporary art. And I think that's another point we didn't discuss today, but how present our history is in contemporary art. It's incredible. The use of icons until, again, Jeff Koons with Vuitton again. But I mean, icons, I think it's very important, and it's very Warholish. I think that's, again, Warhol be a pioneer or, on the idea of icons. There's another point. Last year, I'm always pretending not to love ancient art, but I'm ready to curate a show in this place. because it's incredible. So as a director, I reopened Palazzo Cini, which I invite all of you, in case you come to Venice to visit. It's a little house where the Count Cini got his collection from 13th centuries with great concerts, from Berenson to Zeri, so from Giotto to Botticelli to Pontormo, to all the ferraries, and it's the only place you could see Florentine and Tuscans and ferraries in Venice. So it's kind of Piero la Francesca, Luca Signorelli, it's like few works, but very well chosen. So when he died, we only received that part. We didn't receive the Venetians. And he had Canaletto, Ricci, Piazzetta, everything. So I not only reopened the Palazzo, which was closed since 15 years to the public, just for scholars, which was another scandal. As you know, being a director of a very active and delicate at the same time institution. But I reopened the second floor, which is a wide space with rooms in the house. So I had the chance to bring after hunting again, I had a chance to bring almost all the Venetian paintings belonging to Cini, which we were not seen since 55 years, even from scholars, from Titian from Giambono to Titian to Canaletto to whatever, you just like say name and he had it. And I hanged it in there. So a friend of mine, which is an artist I've been working, I wasn't working, but I really love his work and we became more than just acquainted, which is Vic Muniz, a photographer. I did up to Venice and I said, like, as you said, I wanted you to do something on Venice, but I don't want you to do something on postcards, not pop. So why don't you think about something? And so on, continuing because of the Biennale. So the Biennale is a great occasion for us. Then he left, and he was, he was getting ready to get married and everything. So you get into the artist life because, as Chiara knows very well, you're waiting for a project because they wanted it, and then they leave because they wanted to go on holidays. And they don't answer for a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months. I do that sometimes too. And then 2 months afterwards, I ended up, I don't know if you can just Google it or something. It's called Vic Muniz Afterglow. He ended up on reproducing in his collaging way our painting by Dosso Dossi, which is an amazing painting. And I was going like, wow. And then he started to do it with our Canalettos. And then he started to do it with painting with ruins. So we ended up on Vic doing 9 new works, which 3 of them were works copying and reproducing on the Vic Muniz way, using abandoned art books, were Cini paintings. So that's a relation I love, and that's a responsibility I love. Now, all these works are traveling the world, and they're bringing the idea of Venice, ancient masters, to contemporary art. Well, of course, we have to do it with the right artists. You can see a Panini there, and they were incredible. I just tried to. Do you have 5 minutes more? For freezing.
Pass out blankets.
But I wanted to show you, I don't know if this is the right one, the way they're done. No, they're, you can just see something. He's working, he was also awarded because he's working on these junk. So he got tons of art books abandoned and put it in the junk. So it was like researching all this because of this show. And it was rebuying art books. So every single painting is done by tons of cutted images. So it was a nightmare for the art historians because every single work, I tell you tons. But it's interesting because, no, that's a palazzo there. It's interesting because, because he's doing the collages
can you see a little bit more here? So the collages are like a meter big. Then he shoots them with an extremely complicated camera, and it ended up to this. So
That's a good, I think, a good relation.
Maybe one last question? Anyone has it? We have no reception, that's it. We can certainly continue the discussion over drinks downstairs. And please join me in thanking Chiara and Luca for working.